I'd always imagined that if the end ever came, it would be gradual, like a slow unraveling of a once tightly knit fabric, fraying at the edges, giving you time to see and prepare for the inevitable. But nothing could have prepared me for that night. There was no slow fade, no gradual descent. It came like a sudden violent storm, tearing through the calm, leaving destruction in its wake. The front door creaked open just as I was about to head to bed. It was late, later than usual, and the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle with unease. Jessica had always had a habit of sneaking in late after a long day at work, her footsteps light as if she didn't want to disturb the peace of the sleeping house. But tonight was different. I could sense it immediately, even before I saw her. There was something in the air, a tension, a heaviness. She seemed distant, almost ghost-like. Her presence there, but not really, like she was already half gone. I'd been trying to ignore the warning signs for weeks, maybe even months. The late nights that became more frequent, the hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when I walked into the room, the way she pulled away from me when I reached for her hand, as if my touch burned her. I convinced myself it was just a phase, that she was stressed or tired, but deep down I knew. I knew something was wrong, something more than just the everyday strains of life. But I wasn't ready to face it, wasn't ready to admit that our marriage, the foundation of my life, was crumbling beneath my feet. But that night, I had no choice. The truth was staring me in the face, demanding to be acknowledged. I was halfway down the hallway when I noticed the envelope on the kitchen counter. It stood out starkly against the polished wood, an unwelcome intruder in the heart of our home. It was addressed to me in Jessica's neat, looping handwriting that I'd seen 1,000 times on grocery lists, birthday cards, and love notes. My heart began to race, a cold dread settling in my stomach. I picked it up with trembling hands, the paper crinkling slightly under the pressure of my grip, and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded crisply in half. The words were short, but they cut deep, deeper than any knife ever could. Jake, I'm sorry to do this to you, but I can't keep living a lie. I've been seeing someone else for a while now. Adam. I've tried to keep it from you, but it's impossible to hide the truth any longer. I don't want this life anymore. I'm leaving you, and I'm leaving everything we built together behind. This is my choice, and it's what I need to do for myself. Jessica. The room spun around me as I read and reread the words, hoping, praying that I had misunderstood, that it was some kind of sick joke or a mistake. But it wasn't. The truth was there, clear and undeniable, in black and white. Jessica, my wife of 13 years, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone in the world, had decided to dismantle our life together with a few cold, emotionless sentences. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, and I was free falling into an abyss with no end in sight. I could hardly breathe as I tried to process the betrayal, my mind racing to make sense of it all. Every memory, every moment we had shared over the years came rushing back in a flood of images and emotions. Our wedding day, the vacations, the quiet nights at home, the laughter, the tears. It all felt like a lie now, tainted by the knowledge that she had been seeing someone else, that she had been planning her escape while I was blissfully unaware, believing in a future that no longer existed. All the arguments, the distance, the late nights, suddenly they all made sense. I could see it now, the signs that I had missed or ignored, the way she had been pulling away from me inch by inch until there was nothing left but a hollow shell of the love we once shared. How long had she been lying to me? How long had she been planning this? As the shock began to settle into a cold numbness, a realization washed over me. My life would never be the same again. The future I had envisioned, the plans we had made, were gone, shattered by the words on that piece of paper. Jessica was gone, and with her, the life we had built together. All that was left was the empty shell of our marriage, a house that was no longer a home, and a man who no longer knew where he stood in the world. I sank onto the kitchen chair, the letter still clutched in my hand, my mind blank and numb. What do you do when the person you trusted most in the world betrays you? When the life you thought was secure is ripped away from you in an instant? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that I was alone, and that I was about to face the hardest battle of my life, one that I wasn't sure I was strong enough to fight. I remember the first time I saw Jessica vividly, as if it were etched into my mind with an indelible ink. It was at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago, a quaint little place I frequented for its rich, strong coffee and its serene, cozy atmosphere. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the faint scent of old books and pastries. It was the kind of place where you could lose yourself in a good book or a quiet conversation, away from the bustling city outside. Jessica was sitting alone at a corner table, her back turned toward me, completely absorbed in a book. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, catching the light that filtered through the rain-streaked window beside her. She absent-mindedly stirred her latte, her movements gentle and deliberate. There was something incredibly captivating about her presence, even in such a simple moment. When she finally looked up and noticed me, her eyes met mine with a spark of curiosity and warmth. Her laughter, which came moments later, was like a beacon of light breaking through a cloudy sky. It was warm and genuine, a bright contrast to the dreary, rainy afternoon outside. Her smile seemed to light up the room, and in that instant, everything else faded away. It was as if time had momentarily stopped, allowing us to share a perfect, unspoken connection. We hit it off immediately, our conversation flowing effortlessly, as if we had known each other for years. There was something about her that drew me in, a magnetic quality that made me feel at ease and excited all at once. Jessica had a way of making the ordinary seem extraordinary, of turning even the smallest moments into something memorable. Our conversations were rich and engaging, our shared jokes quickly becoming inside secrets that bound us together. The chemistry between us was undeniable, a palpable force that made us feel as if we were destined to be together. Our courtship was nothing short of magical. I vividly recall the weekends we spent exploring the city, discovering hidden gems in the form of charming restaurants and quirky art galleries. Every moment with Jessica felt like an adventure, a new chapter in a story we were writing together. We were young and full of dreams, our eyes wide with the belief that our love could overcome any obstacle. The world seemed full of possibilities, and we were eager to embrace them all, hand in hand. I remember our wedding day with clarity and emotion. It was a small, intimate ceremony held in a picturesque venue with only our closest family and friends. Jessica looked radiant in her white dress, her happiness and excitement palpable. As I stood at the altar, waiting to exchange our vows, I couldn't believe my luck. I was marrying the woman I had come to adore, the one who had made my life feel complete. The promises we made to each other felt as real and vivid as the sky was blue that day, a testament to our unwavering commitment to one another. In the early years, everything seemed perfect. We moved into a cozy apartment in the city, a space that quickly became our home. Our life together was filled with laughter, shared dreams, and the kind of joy that comes from building a life with someone you love. We celebrated birthdays and holidays with enthusiasm and creativity, each occasion becoming a cherished memory in the tapestry of our life together. The years seemed to stretch out before us, full of promise and happiness. But as time went on, the excitement of the early days began to wane. The demands of work, the pressures of daily life, and the routine of our existence started to weigh us down. Despite my best efforts to keep the spark alive, planning surprise dates, organizing spontaneous getaways, the effort seemed to fall short. It felt as though Jessica was gradually becoming more distant, her laughter less frequent, and our conversations, once lively and engaging, became strained and fragmented. The easy connection we once had seemed to slip through our fingers, replaced by a growing silence that I struggled to bridge. Looking back now, I realized that the cracks in our relationship had started forming long before the letter arrived. The signs were there, subtly woven into the fabric of our everyday life. What had once been a vibrant tapestry of shared moments and mutual understanding was slowly unraveling, and I hadn't been able to see it for what it was. Our love had been tested in ways I hadn't fully grasped, and I was blind to the storm that had been quietly brewing on the horizon. Those memories of our beginning now felt like a cruel reminder of what had been lost. As I sat alone in the kitchen, holding the letter that had torn our life apart, I couldn't help but mourn the life we had shared. The dreams we had built together, the future we had envisioned, everything now lay in ruins, shattered by the sudden and devastating truth. The weight of the loss was almost unbearable, and I was left grappling with the painful realization that the life I had cherished was now a thing of the past, forever changed by a few cruel words on a page. In the weeks leading up to the night I discovered the letter, the subtle changes in Jessica's behavior had been almost imperceptible, like the slow erosion of a cliff's edge, barely noticeable day by day, but unmistakable in hindsight. It was as if she had been gradually drifting away from me, a silent glacier inching toward the sea, with the ice-cold distance growing ever wider between us. I had tried to convince myself that it was merely the pressures of work and the inevitable strains of life that were taking their toll on our relationship. The first sign was her increased irritability. The little things that used to be endearing quirks now seemed to set her off with surprising intensity. I'd make a comment about the weather, a topic so mundane it hardly seemed worth discussing, and she would snap back with an edge in her voice that was both unexpected and unsettling. Our conversations, once filled with easy banter and shared laughter, were increasingly punctuated with long, uncomfortable silences. The unspoken words between us hung heavily in the air, creating a chasm that grew wider with each passing day. The next noticeable shift was the late nights. Jessica, who had always been home promptly by 6, began staying out later and later. At first, I assumed it was due to work commitments or a new project she was involved in. She would come home exhausted and barely able to muster more than a perfunctory greeting. Each time I asked if she needed any help or if there was something I could do to make things easier for her, she would brush off my concerns with a forced smile and a vague excuse. The pattern became too consistent to ignore, and the growing distance between us felt almost palpable. Then came the phone calls. Jessica's phone, once a mere device for everyday communication, had become an object of secrecy. She would take calls in the other room, speaking in hushed tones and casting furtive glances over her shoulder, as if she were engaged in covert activities. When I would ask her about the nature of these calls, she would respond with curt replies. Just work, or nothing important. Her defensiveness only fueled my unease, and the air of secrecy surrounding her phone became a source of growing tension and mistrust. I began to notice changes in her appearance as well. Jessica started dressing differently, more stylishly, as if she were trying to reinvent herself. Her hair was always impeccably styled, and she seemed to be taking extra care with her makeup, which was applied with a precision that spoke of more than just a casual effort. At first, I thought it was a sign that she was feeling more confident or perhaps had a renewed sense of energy. But as time went on, it began to feel as though she was putting on a facade for someone else, as if she were preparing herself for an audience that wasn't me. Our intimacy dwindled to almost nothing. The tender moments we used to share became rare, and when they did occur, they felt forced and devoid of the genuine connection we once had. I would reach out to her, hoping to rekindle the spark that had once brought us so close, but she always seemed to pull away, leaving me feeling increasingly isolated and bewildered. The physical and emotional distance between us grew, and each attempt to bridge the gap seemed to widen it even further. I tried to address these issues with Jessica, but every attempt to talk about our problems was met with resistance. She would deflect my questions with practiced ease, change the subject with an air of indifference, and any effort at honest communication seemed to drive us further apart. The conversations that once brought us together now seemed to serve only to highlight the growing chasm between us. Looking back now, I see that these small, seemingly insignificant changes were the early warnings of a much larger issue. Each minor crack in our relationship, which I had dismissed or failed to recognize, contributed to the larger fracture that would ultimately reveal itself. It wasn't until I found the letter that I fully grasped how deeply the cracks had formed and how fragile our bond had become. The realization was a painful one, and as I sifted through the memories of those final days, I could see the patterns that I had missed, each one a piece of a puzzle that I had been too blinded by love to fully understand. The gradual unraveling of our relationship, which had seemed so imperceptible at the time, now appeared as a series of clear and undeniable signals. Each moment of tension, each instance of distance, had been a warning sign, a piece of a larger story that I had failed to piece together. The once vibrant tapestry of our life together had begun to fray, and the patterns of our downfall were now laid bare for me to see. It was a Tuesday evening when I first noticed something was truly amiss. The day had been particularly grueling, and I had returned home early, hoping to surprise Jessica with a nice dinner. I had envisioned us sharing a quiet, enjoyable evening together, rekindling the warmth that had seemed to dissipate in recent weeks. As I busied myself in the kitchen, preparing our favorite meal, a dish we both loved for its comfort and familiarity. The sound of a message pinging from the dining room table broke the comforting silence. I paused for a moment, my curiosity piqued by the unexpected sound. It wasn't like me to snoop or invade Jessica's privacy, but the frequency and secrecy of her recent phone usage had left me feeling increasingly unsettled. I tried to push my unease aside, refocusing on the task at hand, chopping vegetables, stirring the sauce. But the ping came again, more insistent this time. My curiosity, combined with an unsettling sense of urgency, made it impossible to ignore any longer. I walked into the dining room and saw Jessica's phone lying face up on the table. The screen was illuminated, and the message preview was visible. My heart skipped a beat as I read the name displayed, Adam. Adam was a colleague of Jessica's, someone I had met a few times at work events. He had always seemed like a nice guy, polite and friendly, but I'd never suspected he would be anything more than just a colleague or a friend. The message read, "Can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you." My pulse quickened as I struggled to process the words. The message was unmistakably intimate, the sign-off affectionately signed, "Love, Adam." A rush of betrayal and confusion overwhelmed me. How could this be happening? How could Jessica, who had seemed so distant and preoccupied lately, be involved with someone else? The very foundation of our relationship felt as though it was crumbling beneath me. Desperate for answers, I tried to keep my composure as Jessica arrived home. I greeted her with a strained smile, determined to maintain a semblance of normalcy despite the turmoil roiling inside me. As we sat down for dinner, I found it difficult to concentrate on anything other than the gnawing need to address what I had discovered. Jessica seemed blissfully unaware of my distress, chattering away about her day with a forced cheerfulness that only heightened my sense of disconnection. After dinner, I knew I couldn't postpone the confrontation any longer. I broached the subject with as much calmness as I could muster, asking if she had seen her phone and if everything was okay. Her hesitation was palpable, and her face flushed slightly as she avoided my gaze. When I pressed further, she sighed deeply and looked away, her posture becoming defensive. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice tinged with frustration and an edge of defensiveness. "Adam and I have been working closely on a project. It's just work stuff." I wanted desperately to believe her, to trust that there was a reasonable explanation for the message I had seen. But the words on the screen and the underlying tone of her response told a different story. My heart was pounding, and I struggled to stay calm, knowing that my trust was being tested in a way I had never anticipated. I told her that I had seen the message and needed her to be honest with me. Jessica's demeanor shifted dramatically. She became defensive and distant, her eyes avoiding mine with an air of evasiveness. "Jake, you're reading too much into this. It's complicated, but it's nothing you need to worry about." The more she spoke, the more I sensed the walls going up between us. The emotional distance that had been growing was now palpable, a chasm widening with every word she spoke. Despite her attempts to downplay the situation, the guilt in her voice and the way she avoided my gaze made it painfully clear that something significant had changed. That night, as I lay in bed, the ceiling above me seemed to press down, closing in on me with a weight that felt almost physical. The betrayal was overwhelming, a crushing blow that shattered my sense of security. I replayed the message over and over in my mind, trying to piece together how things had deteriorated so rapidly. The trust that had once been the cornerstone of our marriage now felt irreparably damaged, a casualty of the storm I had hoped would never arrive. The first hint of infidelity was like a thunderclap in a storm I had desperately hoped would never come. It shattered my illusions and forced me to confront the harsh reality I had been denying for too long. The comfortable life I had imagined for us was now eclipsed by the stark truth of Jessica's betrayal, and I was left grappling with the fragments of a future that seemed to be slipping away. The following day, I was consumed by the revelation of the message I had seen on Jessica's phone. My mind was a whirlwind of unanswered questions and turbulent emotions. I was desperate for clarity, and the only person who could provide it was Adam. As fate would have it, I spotted Adam at a cafe near my office during my lunch break. He was sitting alone at a corner table, absorbed in his work on a laptop. It felt almost serendipitous that I should find him here, and I knew I had to seize this chance to confront him. My heart raced as I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation that lay ahead. I walked up to his table, each step heavy with purpose. Adam, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Do you have a moment? Adam looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness. Jake, hey, what's going on? Without waiting for an invitation, I pulled out a chair and sat down. We need to talk, I said, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. Adam's initial confusion quickly gave way to apprehension as he closed his laptop and gave me his full attention. Sure, what's up? I didn't waste any time with pleasantries. I saw a message on Jessica's phone yesterday. It was from you. It wasn't just a friendly note, Adam. I need to know what's really going on between you two. Adam's face flushed, and he shifted uneasily in his seat. Jake, Cut the crap, I interrupted, my patience wearing thin. I need to hear the truth. Are you and Jessica involved with each other? He glanced around the cafe, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Yes, we are, he admitted, his voice barely audible. But it's not what you think. Jessica and we've been close for a while now. A surge of anger and hurt crashed over me. Close? You mean to say you've been having an affair? Adam's eyes fell to the table, avoiding mine. Yes, but it wasn't something we planned. It just developed over time. The admission was like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. So what does that mean? Are you two planning to be together? Adam sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. Jessica has been unhappy for a long time. We didn't intend for this to happen, but it did. And yes, she's made it clear that she wants to be with me now. The weight of his words hit me with the force of a sledgehammer. Jessica's feelings, her choices, and now Adam's involvement had turned everything into a tangled mess of betrayal and deceit. And what about me, Adam? Did you ever consider how this would affect my life? Adam's face softened with a hint of remorse, though his guilt did little to ease my pain. I'm sorry, Jake. I never meant for any of this to spiral out of control. But Jessica and we didn't know how to stop it. I stood up abruptly, the torrent of anger and sorrow threatening to engulf me. You've done enough damage, Adam. I don't want to hear any more excuses. Just stay away from my wife. Adam nodded, his expression a mix of guilt and resignation. I understand. As I walked away from the cafe, the conversation weighed heavily on my shoulders. The truth, once revealed, was even more painful than I had anticipated. I had hoped for some semblance of clarity, but instead, I was left grappling with a deeper sense of betrayal and confusion. The encounter with Adam had confirmed my worst fears, but it also left me reeling from the reality of how my life was unraveling. The trust I had placed in both Jessica and Adam had been shattered beyond repair, and the road ahead seemed fraught with uncertainty. The reality of my situation, stark and unforgiving, left me feeling adrift in a sea of broken promises and fractured dreams. The next few days were a blur of emotions and confusion. I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but every corner of our home seemed to echo with the weight of Jessica's betrayal. I couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that I needed to understand the full extent of what had happened. One afternoon, while Jessica was out running errands, I found myself standing in our bedroom staring at her dresser. The sight of her things, neatly arranged, felt like a cruel reminder of the life we once shared. I knew I shouldn't be snooping, but my desperation to understand drove me to open one of her drawers. Inside, I found an assortment of personal items, makeup, old receipts, and scattered notes. As I sifted through them, I came across a small leather-bound journal, its cover worn with use. It was tucked away in a corner, almost as if it were hiding. My hands trembled as I opened it. The pages were filled with Jessica's handwriting, detailing events and emotions that were both intimate and distressing. I flipped through the entries, my heart sinking as I read her thoughts and feelings about Adam. She had written about their meetings, their shared moments, and her growing feelings for him. One entry stood out. Adam and I have been spending more time together. I never intended for it to go this far, but he understands me in a way that Jake hasn't lately. I feel alive when I'm with him, something I haven't felt in a long time. I know it's wrong, but I can't help myself. I want more, and I can't ignore these feelings anymore. Asterisk. The pain was visceral as I read her words. It was clear that this wasn't just a fleeting affair. It was a deep, emotional connection that she had developed over time. Jessica's struggle to reconcile her feelings with her commitment to me was laid bare on those pages. I closed the journal, my mind racing. I felt a mix of anger and profound sadness. The betrayal was not just physical but emotional. Jessica's journal had revealed how deeply she had fallen for Adam and how she had been grappling with her dissatisfaction with our marriage. The discovery left me reeling. I now had a clearer picture of the situation, but it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. The journal had provided insight, but it also confirmed the depth of the betrayal and the complexity of Jessica's feelings. As I put the journal back where I had found it, I knew that things could never go back to how they were before. The trust that had been shattered was now beyond repair, and the future of our marriage seemed more uncertain than ever. The discovery had forced me to confront the harsh reality of Jessica's infidelity and the emotional turmoil that came with it. I couldn't delay it any longer. I had to confront Jessica about what I had discovered. I had spent days wrestling with my thoughts, trying to process the betrayal and the emotional wreckage left in its wake. The journal had only solidified what I already knew. Our marriage was on the brink of collapse. That evening, as Jessica walked in the door, I could tell she was in a good mood. She greeted me with a smile and a quick kiss on the cheek, but I could barely return the gesture. The weight of the journal and the conversations with Adam were too heavy to ignore. "Jessica, we need to talk," I said, my voice firm but strained. Her smile faltered slightly, and she set her things down, looking at me with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Sure, what's on your mind?" I gestured for her to sit down on the couch. As we both settled, I took a deep breath and tried to steady my emotions. "I know about the affair, Jessica. I found your journal and read it. I saw everything, how it started, how it progressed, and how you've been feeling." Her face turned pale, and her eyes widened in shock. "Jake, don't," I interrupted. "I don't want to hear any more excuses or justifications. I need you to be honest with me. Why did you feel the need to hide this from me? Why did you let it get this far?" Jessica looked down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I didn't want to hurt you. I've been struggling with how to end things for a while, but I didn't know how. Adam, he made me feel things I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't supposed to turn into this." "Supposed to?" I asked, my voice rising. "You were having an affair for months, Jessica. This wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. And now you're telling me it wasn't supposed to happen?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Jake. I never meant for it to get this complicated. I thought I could manage it, that it wouldn't hurt you as much if I kept it hidden." I shook my head, the depth of the betrayal hitting me hard. "The damage is already done. The lies, the deceit. It's all irreparable. You've made it clear that you want to be with Adam. So what now?" Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know what to say. I never wanted to hurt you like this. I don't know how to fix it." Her helplessness only added to my frustration. "It's too late for apologies. I need to think about what's best for me now. I need to figure out how to move forward." Jessica nodded, her face a mixture of guilt and resignation. "I understand. I know I've hurt you beyond measure. I'm so sorry." The conversation ended with an uncomfortable silence. Jessica's apologies felt hollow against the backdrop of the pain she had caused. As she left the room, I was left alone with my thoughts, grappling with the reality of our broken marriage. The confrontation had laid everything bare, but it also highlighted the emotional chasm that now separated us. The future of our relationship was uncertain, and the road ahead was fraught with pain and difficult decisions. Jessica's departure from our shared life was swift and jarring. Once the confrontation was over, she wasted no time in setting her plan into motion. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and everything we had built together was suddenly up for grabs. The first signs of her departure were subtle, but unmistakable. Jessica began to pack her belongings with an almost mechanical efficiency. Boxes appeared in the living room, and I found her methodically sorting through our possessions, deciding what to keep and what to discard. The process was clinical, devoid of the emotional weight I would have expected. It felt as if she was removing pieces of her life without a second thought. She sold several of our most cherished items, furniture, artwork, and even the piano we had bought on a whim years ago. Each sale was a reminder of the life we had shared, now being dismantled piece by piece. I watched in helpless disbelief as she emptied rooms that had once been filled with laughter and shared memories. Jessica also resigned from her job, a decision that seemed both drastic and final. She told me it was a necessary step for her new beginning with Adam. The office, once a place of routine and stability, became another symbol of her departure. Her colleagues reached out to me, expressing their condolences and confusion. I could see the shock in their eyes mirroring my own. The emotional toll of witnessing Jessica's detachment was profound. She avoided eye contact, spoke in terse, clipped sentences, and seemed entirely focused on her future with Adam. The few conversations we had were businesslike, revolving around logistics and legalities. The personal connection we once had felt like a distant memory. Jessica's urgency to leave was palpable. She made arrangements for a new apartment and set a moving date that was alarmingly soon. The transition was happening so quickly that I barely had time to process each change before another came barreling toward me. I tried to hold on to some semblance of control. I began sorting through the remnants of our life together, deciding what to keep and what to let go. The process was emotionally exhausting, as each item evoked memories of better times. Every decision felt heavy, a reflection of the life I was losing. The finality of Jessica's actions began to sink in. It was clear that her resolve was unwavering, and the life we had built was being dismantled with a speed that left me reeling. The destruction of our shared existence was not just physical, but deeply emotional. The life I had once known was slipping through my fingers, and I struggled to find a way to move forward amidst the rubble. As Jessica packed up the last of her things and prepared to leave, I was left to confront the stark reality of our fractured relationship. The destruction was complete, and the future was now an uncertain expanse I had to navigate alone. Jessica's departure left a void that was as cold and silent as the house she left behind. The emptiness was palpable. The once warm and lively spaces of our home now felt like a hollow shell, echoing with the absence of her presence. Each room seemed to mock the memories we had shared, now tainted by the betrayal and the painful ending that followed. I spent the first few days in a daze, struggling to adjust to the new reality. The silence was deafening, a constant reminder of what had been lost. Our bed felt too big, the kitchen too quiet, and the living room too empty without her laughter. Every corner of the house was a painful reminder of the life we had built together, now reduced to a collection of memories that I wasn't sure I wanted to keep. Work became my only refuge, a place where I could lose myself in tasks and deadlines, temporarily escaping the emotional turmoil that awaited me at home. But even there, the fallout of our separation was impossible to escape. Colleagues who had known Jessica would ask after her, their innocent inquiries twisting the knife that was already lodged deep in my heart. I began to dread those conversations, offering vague responses and excuses, anything to avoid discussing the truth. Social interactions outside of work were even more challenging. Friends who had once been part of our shared social circle were caught in the crossfire of our separation. Some reached out, offering support and sympathy, but their well-meaning words often felt hollow. Others distanced themselves, unsure of how to navigate the awkwardness that now surrounded my life. I found myself increasingly isolated, unable to face the world that had once seemed so familiar and safe. Sleep became elusive, the nights stretching out interminably as my mind replayed the events of the past few weeks over and over. The betrayal, the confrontation, the destruction. Each memory was a fresh wound, refusing to heal. I would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, consumed by thoughts of Jessica and the life we had lost. As the days turned into weeks, I began to realize the full extent of the damage that had been done. It wasn't just my marriage that had been destroyed, but my sense of self, my confidence, and my trust in others. I felt like a shadow of the person I'd once been, hollowed out by the betrayal and the pain that followed. The few friends who remained close tried to pull me out of my despair, urging me to move on, to rebuild my life. But their words felt distant and unreal, as if they were speaking to someone else entirely. I knew they meant well, but I wasn't ready to let go of the past. The wounds were too fresh, the pain too raw. The fallout from Jessica's departure was more than just emotional. It was a complete upheaval of the life I had known. I was left to pick up the pieces, but I didn't know where to start. The future seemed like an endless expanse of uncertainty, and I was adrift in a sea of my own grief, unable to find solid ground. In those dark days, I came to understand just how deeply the betrayal had affected me. It wasn't just the loss of a partner, it was the loss of everything I had believed in: trust, love, and the idea of forever. The fallout was a reckoning, forcing me to confront the reality of my life and the long road ahead to rebuild it. As the initial shock of Jessica's departure began to fade, the reality of what lay ahead started to take shape. It wasn't just the emotional wreckage I had to deal with, there was also the matter of legally dissolving our marriage. The thought of it filled me with dread. Divorce was something I'd never imagined I would face, and the prospect of going through a legal battle with the woman I had once loved was almost too much to bear. But there was no avoiding it. The practicalities of ending our marriage loomed over me, demanding attention. We had shared a life, a home, finances, and a future, or so I had thought. Now all of that had to be unraveled, piece by piece, until nothing was left. I reached out to a lawyer, someone recommended by a friend who had gone through a similar ordeal. The first meeting was surreal. I sat in the lawyer's office listening as they explained the process: division of assets, potential alimony, and the endless paperwork that would accompany the end of our marriage. The language was cold and clinical, a stark contrast to the emotional storm brewing inside me. As we discussed the division of assets, it became clear that the process would not be simple. Jessica and I had accumulated a fair amount over the years: a house, cars, savings, investments. Everything we had built together now had to be divided, and each decision felt like another cut, another reminder of what had been lost. Jessica had hired her own lawyer, and the negotiations quickly turned contentious. What had started as a relatively amicable separation rapidly devolved into a battle over who would get what. The lawyer relayed Jessica's demands to me. She wanted a significant portion of our savings, as well as the house. It was clear she wasn't going to make this easy. I felt betrayed all over again. After everything she had done, now she wanted to take even more from me? The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted, and I found myself pushing back harder than I had anticipated. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything, not after the destruction she had caused. The legal battle became an exhausting back and forth of offers, counteroffers, and endless negotiations. What should have been a straightforward process turned into a drawn-out ordeal that drained me both emotionally and financially. Every time I thought we were close to an agreement, something would change, and we would be back at square one. Friends and family offered their support, but I found it hard to talk about the legal battle without becoming overwhelmed by frustration and bitterness. It felt like every step forward was met with a new obstacle, another reminder of how far my life had spiraled out of control. The toll on my mental health was significant. I was constantly on edge, unable to relax or find any peace. The legal battle consumed my thoughts, making it difficult to focus on anything else. Even at work, where I had once found refuge, I was distracted and irritable, my patience worn thin by the endless stress of the divorce. As the weeks turned into months, the battle over our assets began to wear me down. There were moments when I considered giving in, just to make it all stop. But then, I would remember everything Jessica had done: the lies, the betrayal, the way she had so casually dismantled our life together, and I would find the strength to keep fighting. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, we reached a settlement. It wasn't what I had hoped for, but it was something I could live with. The house would be sold and the proceeds divided. Jessica would receive a portion of our savings, and I would keep the car and some of our investments. It was a compromise, but one that allowed me to finally close the door on this painful chapter of my life. The legal battle had been grueling, but it was also a turning point. It forced me to confront the reality of my situation and to take control of my future, even when everything felt like it was falling apart. As I signed the final papers, there was a sense of relief, but also a profound sadness. The marriage that had once meant everything to me was now just a stack of legal documents, a part of my past that I was finally ready to leave behind. With the legal battle finally behind me, I expected to feel a sense of relief, maybe even a small victory in reclaiming my life. But as the dust settled and the reality of my new situation took hold, what I felt was something closer to emptiness. The anger that had fueled me through the divorce process was gone, leaving only a deep, gnawing sadness in its place. The house, now stripped of its former life, was eerily quiet. Jessica's belongings were gone, and with them, the last tangible remnants of our marriage. The rooms that had once been filled with warmth and laughter were now just empty spaces, echoing with memories that I couldn't escape. I tried to focus on moving forward, to embrace the freedom that came with being on my own again. But the transition was far from easy. Every routine, every habit was a reminder of the life I had lost. Simple things like cooking dinner or watching TV felt strange and hollow without Jessica there. I had to relearn how to live in this new, unfamiliar reality. Nights were the hardest, the silence was deafening, and sleep became an elusive refuge. I would lie awake for hours, my mind racing with thoughts of what had happened, of what I could have done differently. Regret and self-doubt crept in, filling the void left by the anger that had once driven me. I questioned everything, my decisions, my actions, even my own worth. How had I let things get so out of control? How had I not seen the signs? The emotional aftermath of the divorce was like a storm that refused to pass. Some days I felt like I was drowning in the grief and loss. Other days, I was simply numb, going through the motions without any real sense of purpose. The future that once seemed so clear was now a blank slate, and the prospect of starting over was both daunting and terrifying. I found myself withdrawing from friends and family, not wanting to burden them with my pain. I knew they cared, that they wanted to help, but I didn't know how to let them in. I was afraid that if I started talking about what I was feeling, I wouldn't be able to stop, and the floodgates would open, overwhelming me and them. In an attempt to distract myself, I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects and responsibilities. It helped, to an extent. The busyness kept my mind occupied, leaving little room for the painful thoughts that lurked in the background. But no matter how much I tried to bury myself in work, the sadness was always there, waiting for a quiet moment to resurface. I also started going to the gym more frequently, pushing my body to its limits in an effort to escape the emotional turmoil. The physical exertion was a temporary relief, a way to channel the pain into something tangible. But even as I built strength, I couldn't shake the feeling of weakness that had settled in my heart. Therapy became a lifeline. I hesitated at first, reluctant to open up to a stranger about the darkest parts of my life. But as the weeks went on, it became clear that I needed help to navigate the overwhelming emotions I was dealing with. The sessions were hard, confronting my pain, my anger, my regret, but they were also necessary. Slowly, I began to untangle the knots inside me, to make sense of what had happened, and to start the long, painful process of healing. Through therapy, I came to realize that the emotional aftermath of the divorce wasn't something I could simply get over or move past. It was something I had to go through, to feel fully, in order to eventually emerge on the other side. There were no shortcuts, no easy fixes. The pain was a part of the process, a sign that I was still human, still capable of feeling, even after everything I had been through. The emotional aftermath was a journey, a difficult, winding path that I had to walk alone, but one that I knew would eventually lead to a place of acceptance and, hopefully, peace. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I wasn't sure I would make it, but I held on to the hope that, in time, the pain would lessen, and I would find a way to rebuild my life from the ashes of what had been destroyed. After months of navigating the emotional aftermath, I began to realize that it was time to start rebuilding my life. The pain was still there, lingering in the background, but it no longer consumed me. I was beginning to accept that Jessica was gone, that the life we had was over, and that it was up to me to forge a new path forward. The first step in rebuilding was finding a new place to live. The house we had shared was too full of memories, too connected to the past for me to stay there any longer. I needed a fresh start, a space that was truly my own. So I sold the house, a process that was bittersweet. There was relief in leaving behind the ghosts of our marriage, but also a deep sadness in saying goodbye to the place where so much of my life had happened. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, a modest space that felt right for this new chapter. Moving in was both daunting and exciting. For the first time in years, I was alone, truly alone. But rather than feeling lonely, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. This was my space, my life, and I could shape it however I wanted. With the move came the opportunity to rediscover who I was outside of my marriage. Over the years, I had lost pieces of myself, sacrificing hobbies and interests for the sake of the relationship. Now, with nothing holding me back, I decided to revisit those parts of myself that had been neglected. I picked up my guitar again, something I hadn't touched in years. At first it felt awkward, my fingers stumbling over the strings. But as the days went by, the muscle memory returned, and I found myself lost in the music, reconnecting with the joy it had once brought me. I also started reading more, something I had always loved, but had let slip away in the busyness of life. I devoured books of all kinds, novels, biographies, poetry, losing myself in other people's stories as a way to escape my own. Through reading, I found solace, a way to make sense of the chaos that had enveloped my life. Traveling was another way I began to rediscover myself. I took weekend trips to nearby cities, exploring new places and meeting new people. The change of scenery was refreshing, and with each trip, I felt a little more like myself again. The world outside my small bubble was full of possibilities, and I was eager to see where it might lead me. Reconnecting with old friends was another important part of the rebuilding process. During the worst of the divorce, I had pushed people away, too consumed by my own pain to let anyone in. But now I reached out, mending the relationships I had neglected. My friends welcomed me back with open arms, offering the support and companionship I had been missing. As I rebuilt my life, I also took the time to reflect on the lessons I had learned through the ordeal. The divorce had changed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. It had forced me to confront my weaknesses, my insecurities, and my mistakes. But it had also shown me my strength, my resilience, and my capacity to heal. I realized that I had been holding on to the idea of who I thought I should be, rather than embracing who I truly was. The marriage, for all its good moments, had also been a place where I had lost sight of myself. Now, with the freedom to be whoever I wanted, I was determined not to make that mistake again. The rebuilding process wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when the loneliness felt overwhelming. But each day, I found new reasons to keep moving forward, new ways to reclaim my life. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it was a part of my story, one chapter among many. In the end, rebuilding and rediscovery were about more than just moving on from the divorce. They were about finding my way back to myself, about embracing the person I had become through the trials and tribulations. It was a journey of healing, growth, and ultimately, renewal. And while the future was still uncertain, I felt more prepared than ever to face it, armed with the knowledge that I had survived the worst and come out the other side stronger and more self-assured. As time passed and the wounds from my marriage began to heal, I found myself gradually warming to the idea of opening up to love again. It wasn't something I had planned or even thought much about at first. In fact, for a long time, I avoided any kind of romantic entanglement. The idea of being vulnerable again, of potentially facing another betrayal, was terrifying. But as I continued to rebuild my life, the notion of companionship, of finding someone to share this new chapter with, started to feel less like a risk and more like a possibility. It began with small steps. I started going out more, attending social gatherings and reconnecting with the world around me. Friends encouraged me to join them at events, and I pushed myself to say yes, even when it felt uncomfortable. The first few times were awkward. I was rusty at making small talk, and the idea of flirting felt completely foreign, but I slowly began to find my footing. Online dating was something I never thought I'd try, but after some gentle nudging from friends, I decided to give it a shot. The experience was a mixed bag. Some dates were pleasant, others were forgettable, and a few were outright disasters. But with each encounter, I learned a little more about what I was looking for, and just as importantly, what I wasn't. As I navigated this new world of dating, I was careful to protect my heart. I wasn't in a rush to fall in love, or to settle down again. I had learned the hard way that true connection takes time, and that it was okay to be cautious. But I also knew that I couldn't let fear hold me back forever. I had to be willing to take a chance if I ever wanted to find happiness again. Eventually, I met someone who caught me by surprise. Her name was Rachel. We met at a mutual friend's dinner party, one of those events I had almost talked myself out of attending. From the moment we started talking, there was an ease between us that I hadn't felt in a long time. She was smart, funny, and kind, with a warmth that put me at ease. We spent the evening engrossed in conversation, and by the time the night ended, I found myself wanting to see her again. Our first date was simple, a walk through the park followed by coffee at a cozy little cafe. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping declarations, just two people enjoying each other's company. It was exactly what I needed. As we continued to see each other, I felt myself slowly letting go of the fears and insecurities that had held me back for so long. Rachel was different from anyone I had ever met. She had her own story, her own scars, and she wasn't afraid to share them. Our conversations were open and honest, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could be myself. No pretenses, no walls. She understood the complexities of love and loss, and she wasn't looking to rush into anything either. We were both content to let things unfold naturally, without pressure or expectations. As our relationship deepened, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The pain of my divorce, the struggles of rebuilding my life, the rediscovery of who I was, all of it had led me here. I realized that while the scars of the past would always be a part of me, they didn't have to define my future. I could choose to embrace love again, not out of need or desperation, but from a place of strength and self-awareness. Being with Rachel felt different, simpler, lighter. There was no underlying tension, no sense of walking on eggshells. We could talk for hours or sit in comfortable silence, and both felt equally fulfilling. She brought a sense of peace into my life, something I hadn't known I was missing. But even as things progressed, I was careful not to lose myself again. I had worked too hard to rebuild my life to let it slip away. Rachel understood this, and she supported me in my efforts to maintain my independence and continue pursuing my passions. We were partners, not just in love, but in life, encouraging each other to grow and evolve. Opening up to love again wasn't easy, but it was worth it. It was a reminder that life is full of second chances, that even after the darkest storms, there's the possibility of sunshine. Rachel wasn't just someone I loved. She was someone who helped me see the world, and myself, in a new light. With her, I found not just a partner, but a new beginning, one that I was ready to embrace with open arms. As we moved forward together, I knew that the journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, still be moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. I had survived the worst. And now, with Rachel by my side, I was ready to build something new, something beautiful, one day at a time. As my relationship with Rachel deepened, so did the challenges that came with opening up to love again. Despite the happiness I felt with her, there were moments when the scars from my past marriage resurfaced, casting shadows over our new beginning. Trust, which had been shattered so completely by Jessica's betrayal, wasn't something I could easily rebuild, even with someone as understanding as Rachel. It started with small things, doubts that crept in uninvited, whispers in the back of my mind that questioned Rachel's intentions, or wondered if I was truly worthy of her love. I knew these thoughts were a product of my past, but knowing didn't make them any easier to silence. They were rooted in fear, a fear of being hurt again, of allowing myself to be vulnerable, only to be betrayed once more. Rachel noticed the moments when I pulled back, when I seemed distant or lost in thought. She never pressured me to talk, but her concern was evident. One evening, as we sat together on the couch after dinner, she gently asked me what was on my mind. I hesitated, unsure how to put my feelings into words, but the openness and patience in her eyes gave me the courage to try. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of letting myself trust again, of opening up and getting hurt. I don't want to lose you, but sometimes I don't know how to stop these thoughts." Rachel listened quietly, her hand resting on mine, a gesture that anchored me to the moment. "I can't promise that everything will be perfect," she said softly, "but I can promise that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. We can take this one step at a time, together." Her words were a balm to my wounded heart, but I knew that trust wasn't something that could be built overnight. It would take time, patience, and a willingness to confront the ghosts of my past. Rachel understood this, and rather than pushing me, she supported me in my efforts to work through these fears. We began having more open conversations about trust and vulnerability, not just in the context of our relationship, but also about our past experiences. Rachel shared her own stories of love and loss, and through these discussions, I realized that I wasn't alone in my struggles. She had her own fears and insecurities, and seeing her openness about them made me feel less isolated in mine. One of the turning points came during a weekend getaway we took to a cabin in the mountains. It was meant to be a relaxing trip, a chance to escape from the pressures of daily life and enjoy each other's company in a peaceful setting. The first day was perfect. We hiked through the woods, cooked dinner together, and spent the evening by the fire talking and laughing. But that night, as I lay beside Rachel in the dark, the old fears crept back in, stronger than ever. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, replaying old memories, dredging up every hurtful word, every betrayal I had experienced with Jessica. The fear of history repeating itself was overwhelming. And before I knew it, I was getting out of bed, needing to escape the suffocating thoughts. Rachel followed me to the living room, where I sat on the couch, my head in my hands. She didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside me, waiting until I was ready to speak. Finally, I told her everything, about the thoughts that wouldn't leave me alone, about the fear that had gripped me so tightly I could hardly breathe. It all came pouring out, raw and unfiltered. Rachel listened patiently, not interrupting or trying to offer solutions. When I was finished, she reached for my hand and squeezed it gently. "I know you've been hurt," she said quietly. "And I know it's hard to trust again, but I'm not Jessica. I'm not here to hurt you or to take advantage of your trust. I'm here because I care about you, because I want to build something real with you, but I need you to believe that, to let me in, even when it's hard." Her words struck a chord deep within me. I realized that in order to truly move forward, I had to let go of the past. I had to stop comparing Rachel to Jessica, to stop letting old wounds dictate my present. It was easier said than done, but in that moment, I knew I had to try, for both of our sakes. The rest of the weekend was transformative. We spent more time talking, not just about our relationship, but about our hopes, our dreams, and our fears. Each conversation brought us closer, and I began to feel the walls I had built around my heart start to crack, letting Rachel in a little more each time. When we returned home, I made a conscious effort to be more open with Rachel, to communicate my feelings rather than bottling them up. It wasn't easy, and there were times when the old fears resurfaced, but each time Rachel was there, patient and understanding, helping me navigate the difficult emotions. Over time, I started to see that trust wasn't about erasing the past, but about building something new on its foundation. It was about learning to trust myself again, to believe that I was capable of making good decisions and that I deserved to be happy. And it was about trusting Rachel, about allowing her to love me, without constantly questioning her motives. Navigating trust and vulnerability was a journey, one that required constant effort and self-reflection. But with Rachel by my side, I felt stronger, more capable of facing the challenges that came our way. I knew there would still be difficult moments, but I also knew that together, we could handle them. And as I continued to let go of the past, I found myself more open to the possibilities of the future, to the love that Rachel and I were building, one day at a time. The journey of the past few years had been anything but easy. From the depths of betrayal and loss to the slow, painful process of rebuilding, I had been through more than I ever thought I could handle. But as I stood on the other side of it all, I realized that I had found something I never expected: peace. It wasn't a sudden revelation, but rather a gradual realization that the weight I had been carrying for so long had finally started to lift. The anger, the bitterness, the fear, they no longer held the same power over me. I had learned to live with my scars, to accept them as part of who I was, without letting them define my future. Rachel had been a big part of that journey, but finding peace was something I had to do for myself. It required facing the darkest parts of my past, forgiving myself for the mistakes I had made, and letting go of the guilt and regret that had haunted me. It was about acknowledging the pain without letting it control me, about embracing the uncertainty of the future with a heart that was open rather than guarded. One of the ways I found peace was through acceptance. I had to accept that what happened with Jessica was beyond my control, that no amount of self-blame could change the past. I had to accept that people change, that love can fade, and that sometimes, despite our best efforts, relationships end. This acceptance wasn't about giving up or letting go of hope. It was about finding a way to move forward, to create a new life out of the ashes of the old one. With this acceptance came forgiveness. Forgiving Jessica for her betrayal was one of the hardest things I had to do, but I knew it was necessary if I ever wanted to truly move on. Holding on to the anger and resentment only kept me tied to the past, preventing me from fully embracing the new life I was building. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what had happened or excusing her actions. It was about freeing myself from the burden of carrying that pain. And finally, I had to forgive myself. For the longest time, I had blamed myself for the failure of our marriage, questioning every decision, every moment, wondering what I could have done differently. But through therapy, reflection, and the support of those around me, I came to understand that the end of our marriage wasn't solely my fault. It was the result of two people growing apart, of choices made on both sides, and it wasn't something I could have prevented. Forgiving myself was about accepting that I had done my best and that it was enough. As I found peace within myself, I noticed a shift in my relationship with Rachel. We had always been close, but now there was a deeper sense of connection, a mutual understanding that came from both of us having faced our own demons and come out stronger on the other side. We were no longer just two people trying to make a relationship work. We were partners, building a life together based on trust, respect, and love. The peace I had found allowed me to be fully present in my relationship with Rachel. I no longer felt the need to constantly question her motives or to protect myself from the possibility of getting hurt. Instead, I allowed myself to simply be with her, to enjoy the moments we shared without the shadow of the past hanging over us. Our love was something new, something that wasn't tainted by the pain of what had come before. It was pure, unburdened by the weight of old wounds, and it brought a sense of joy and contentment that I hadn't felt in years. As we continued to build our life together, I began to think about the future in a way I hadn't dared to before. The idea of new beginnings, of starting a family, of creating a home filled with love and laughter, no longer felt like an impossible dream. It felt real, tangible, something that was within reach. Rachel and I talked about our hopes and dreams, about what we wanted for our future, and for the first time, those conversations were filled with excitement rather than fear. Finding peace didn't mean that everything was perfect, or that I would never face challenges again. Life was still unpredictable, and I knew there would be ups and downs, but I felt prepared to face whatever came my way, knowing that I had the strength and resilience to get through it. I had learned that peace wasn't about the absence of pain, but about finding a way to live with it, to let it shape me without breaking me. As I looked back on the journey I had taken, I realized that every step, every struggle had led me to this point. The pain, the heartache, the rebuilding, it had all been necessary to bring me to a place where I could truly appreciate the life I was living now. I had found love again, but more importantly, I had found myself. I had discovered that even in the face of the worst kind of betrayal, it was possible to heal, to rebuild, and to find happiness again. Rachel and I stood together, ready to embrace the future, whatever it might hold. There was a sense of calm, of peace, that came from knowing that we had both been through so much, and yet here we were, stronger, wiser, and more in love than ever. The past was behind us, and a new chapter was beginning, one filled with hope, with possibility, and with the promise of a bright, beautiful future. And as we walked forward hand in hand, I knew that no matter what happened, we would face it together, with open hearts and the peace that comes from truly loving and accepting ourselves and each other.